career-long Boston Red Sox outfielder Mike Greenwell passed away this week from medullary thyroid cancer. That is one rough diagnosis to get. I too had thyroid cancer, but mine was of a vanilla variety compared to that one. Funny thing, recently, a business that I patronize was having a cancer fundraiser for breast cancer, I think. And they asked me if I would care to donate as I was checking out. And I said, sure, because my dad had recently died of cancer and I had twice had it. And they asked me which ones that I had had, if I didn't mind saying. And I began to speak and I said, well, the easier one was thyroid cancer. And the person asking cut me off and said, oh no, not easy. None of them are easy. Never say that it's easy. And what I had been about to say was easier than having ocular melanoma, where your vision is destroyed in one eye. You undergo surgery. I mean, you undergo surgery for both, or at least I did. But the tortures of having eye cancer were so much more significant than those of having thyroid cancer. And I had them in that order. First the eye cancer, then the thyroid cancer, and possibly I had the thyroid cancer due to the radiation I received for the eye cancer. No one can really say that. I mean, not definitively. Maybe it was too many dental x-rays on old machines. No one knows. And certainly I've gone through a lot as a result of having thyroid cancer, and it inconveniences me and causes disruptions to my life to this day. But being partially blind and being routinely poked in the eye as a part of my aftercare is such a constant and continual thing. I have some peace of mind when it comes to the thyroid cancer that as long as I'm properly medicated, that thing will remain quiescent for forever. The eye cancer offers you no such safeguards because melanoma likes to hide. But even so, even when I forget about it, if only for a few minutes, somebody surprises me by coming at me from my right, or I walk into a wall, or I spill something, or I'm just frustrated by it. And I feel like that should be up to me how I relate to these events in my life, not someone behind the counter who I think was well-intentioned. I know that they were. But at the same time, I feel like going back now and saying the easy one compared to what just happened to Mike Greenwell was thyroid cancer, because even within the world of bad things happening to you, there are degrees of suffering. He was only 62 years old. I feel awful for him and his family. And as with so many cancers, if you catch the one that he got before it gets out of its original bounds, you might be okay. But if you get it a day late, well, it's going to be a short and sad ride. And the tragic part of that is when the cancer is an aggressive one, it's not just on you. We can't stand here and say whether we're talking about Mike Greenwell or our Uncle Mike, who we just put in the ground, if he had only gone to the doctor. It's not always like that. It's not that you put off the doctor's appointment an extra week. It's just by the time you felt the symptoms, it might have been too late. Greenwell will be remembered as a very good hitter, but he had a short career as injuries wore him down early. There's a strong, what might have been, aspect to his career, but I hope no one was disappointed. If there's a theme to this week's episode, it's that. He was a third-round pick of the Red Sox in the 1982 draft. He was selected out of high school. The third round that year had better returns than the first round in some years. Players selected included Jimmy Key, Roger McDowell, Joe McGrain, Zane Smith, Dan Pasqua, he had his moments, and John Habian. Boston had 3 picks in the first round that year and pulled Sam Horn with the first one, and 2 players who didn't make it up, high school pitcher Bob Parkins and college first baseman Jeff Ledbetter. Their second round, I don't know why I said Jeff Ledbetter that way, as if it had some meaning, like I was saying Huddy Ledbetter, Leadbelly, the folk singing legend. K-Tel presents the best of Huddy Ledbetter, the beloved Leadbelly. Thrill as you once again hear eternal songs like Goodnight Irene, Rock Island Line, Jump Up, Turn Around, and Pick a Bale of Cotton. That's not a suggestion, that's the song. You may not have a bale of cotton handy, but you will have the best of Leadbelly. I'm going to quit while I'm way behind here. You know, my favorite, or I think the funniest Leadbelly bit is that he moved to Washington. He tried to rent an apartment and he couldn't because it was segregated. So he wrote a song called The Bourgeois Blues, which begins, I tell all you colored folks, listen to me, don't you try to find no home in Washington, D.C., because it's a bourgeois town. Home of the brave, land of the free. I don't want to be mistreated by no bourgeoisie lord in a bourgeois town. Like Leadbelly, we'll be spending some time with that bourgeois town in the second half of the episode. It's fun to go back and look at some of these failed prospects, and of course I say that only in the sense of the objective story of what happened. You have to divorce it from the human story, which is that some young fella didn't have his dream come true. Nowadays, our coverage of ball players and their swings or their pitches is so granular that there usually is some coverage of what happened. But if you're going back over 40 years, as in the 1982 draft, that information may be hard to come by, and you just have to infer it from interrogating the stats. So if I tell you that the Red Sox second round pick, a high school player named Steve Jongaward, didn't make it up either, and the problem seems to have been that he didn't have a position. He was drafted as a shortstop, made 36 errors in his first 58 professional games. That's an .865 fielding percentage, and the Red Sox seem to have said, "'Twill be either the outfield or the plank for ye, lad." Well, he chose the outfield, but of course, if you're a shortstop and you're moved to a position that requires offense, a lot of pressure is put on your bladder. I almost said bladder. I meant bat, but maybe on your bladder too. So it was a bad sign that he subsequently was moved to first base. Then they tried him as a pitcher, and then he went home. And there's sort of a quintessential American story in the tale of Steve Jongaward or Jongaward. I'm not really sure which. And would you believe later in the episode I have a comment by Calvin Coolidge which sort of seems to address that? That's why you're here, right? The Calvin Coolidge comments. The best player taken in the first round, 1982, by anyone, Dwight Gooden, 5th overall pick. If you retroactively reorder the draft so that Greenwell and Key, as well as second rounders David Wells, Barry Bonds didn't sign, and Barry Larkin were taken in the first round, you can pretend that everyone was far more perspicacious than they actually were. Greenwell had cups of coffee with the Red Sox in both 1985 and 1986. It took some time for him to get into the lineup because he wasn't a center fielder, and the left and right fielders were Jim Rice and Dwight Evans. Rice is in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the weaker Hall of Famers, but of course, the guy could hit, and Dwight Evans was arguably a better player on both sides of the ball. They weren't going anywhere. He made his debut as a pinch runner for Rice almost precisely 40 years ago in September of 1985. Managers just wouldn't make a kid the DH back then, and the Sox had good hitters there too. Mike Easler, the hitman in year 1, Don Baylor in year 2, so Greenwell was just blocked for a bit. In 1987, the Sox started to figure out how to find room for him. Evans played some first base, and Rice missed time with injuries. Greenwell helped himself by hitting a lot when he got into the lineup, so not even a manager as sleepy as John McNamara could be so dull as to miss a rookie hitting .342, .401, .583 from June on. In 1988, Greenwell played every day. He hit .325 with a .461 on-base percentage, a .531 slugging percentage, 22 home runs, 87 walks, and the hope was, given how robust that was in context, 88 was kind of a pitcher's year, Earl Hershiser and all that the Red Sox had found their next Ted Williams. It's an unfair comp, especially when you add in the left field lineage that they had at that time that went from Ted Williams to Carl Yastrzemski to Rice and now maybe Mike Greenwell. That's a lot of pressure to put on a kid. In the event, they wound up with Greenwell to Troy O'Leary, and that was kind of that. No disrespect meant to Troy O'Leary or anyone else who has subsequently played left field for the Red Sox. It's better that it stopped so that each player can be his own person rather than the heir to this weighty legacy. I'll give you another one, though, to return to Greenwell's 1988 season for a moment. I know the Red Sox have had some great outfields. 1975 with Rice, Evans, and Fred Lynn. 1979, the same guys with a little bit of Yaz mixed in. And of course, we can go back to the 1910s and Duffy Lewis, Tris Speaker, and Harry Hooper. But how about 1988? Greenwell was in left, Evans was in right, hitting .293 with a .375 on base and a .487 slugging percentage. And young Ellis Burks was in center, hitting .294, .367, .481. Greenwell finished second to Jose Canseco in the MVP voting that year, and Evans finished ninth. Greenwell never got another MVP vote, not a single one. I wonder, in a sense, if he was victimized by whatever was going on with the Red Sox and their team physician back then, because he started to suffer injuries which degraded his ability to hit. Second baseman Marty Barrett, who was with the team from 1982 through 1990, ended up suing the club and its doctor for misdiagnosing his 1989 ACL injury, which hurried his career to a close. And I'm probably going too far to infer some broad-based dysfunction in their system for evaluating injuries. But at the same time, every now and again, a team has a period or at least a series of players where they just insist they're not hurt and they don't need the remedy the player thinks he does. At the very least, nowadays, and then too, there's so much money at stake that a player owes it to himself to get another opinion if he isn't sure. Don't take the first guy's word for it if he denies your pain. This is true for all of us. No, you're fine is not an answer. They need to walk you through it and explain why the pain is transient and why it doesn't require a further remedy. Nah, just give it some time. Show me on the x-ray, man. I base all of the foregoing on the fact that there's a note on Greenwell's page in the 1991 scouting notebook. I told you I was going too far. That said that he only hit 14 home runs in 1990 because his left foot and ankle were bad. He couldn't plant and pull, and that he had said that he needed to have surgery on those parts of his body, but, and here I quote some passive voice writing, at the end of the season, it was postponed. By who? Why? Because he didn't get better. Greenwell was only 26 then. Over the remaining 6 seasons of his career, he missed increasing amounts of time and hit only, and I realize this only is doing a lot of work here, but 293, 351, 438, which is not bad at all. It's just not a star-level performance, and that's where he had been, at least at the plate. Then you figure in that he wasn't a gazelle in the outfield, particularly with a bad leg, and you start trending towards neutral. Both his power and patience declined, along with his ability to pull the ball. It was a bit of a Don Mattingly repeat. Bad back Mattingly was a lot less selective than healthy Mattingly. Bad leg Greenwell lunged at more pitches than good leg Greenwell. Somehow it all had to be working for any of it to work. That was true of both of them. In 1992, he didn't hit at all and underwent elbow surgery, his season ending in June. He had a bit of a bounce back in 1993, but it turned out to be a one-off. He went back to being kind of a light 295 hitter, which again isn't bad in the absence of something more rounded. But by 1996, the Red Sox, who were in one of their more confused periods, and this is traditionally a very confused franchise, had decided they wanted to seek that more rounded player, and Greenwell went off to Japan. He didn't really perform there either. You know, a player having an early peak and a quick decline, or having debilitating injuries while still in his 20s, is not dissimilar to drawing the wrong card from the cancer deck if you are forced to draw one. I'm not trying to trivialize that any more than I was when that person at the cash register chastised me for the way I characterized my own experience. If anything, I'm trying to emphasize the tragedy of it. All of it was out of our hands. It wasn't anything that you did, that Mike Greenwell did. It might have been luck. Maybe it was genes, which isn't even your parents' fault or their 10th grandfather's fault. It's just the way your personal batter got folded. It's a random, often cruel universe, and no matter what you do, you ain't getting out of this fix alive. And when you get down to it, that's the essence of the infinite inning. Hello there, and welcome back to the show, Infinite Inning number 348, in an ongoing series, Collect 'em, Trade 'em, Lend them out to your little nephew Milton, but insist that he not drop cookie crumbs between the pages. Those are really hard to get out of there, even if you shake it really hard. And you try shaking a podcast. Once again, I am, as always, your convivial host, Stephen Goldman. I have the honor to be me. Sometimes it's less of an honor than at other times. But either way, we are all together, taking a trip to the past on a mission to better understand the present, the time machine, as always, being the game of baseball. And the theme this week, as it very often is to borrow from Allen Ginsberg, a little patience and generosity. And also to be amused a bit, I wanted to share this with you. Sometimes I use a transcription program to remind me of what I said in the older episodes. And I would share those with you if I thought they were any good, because I do understand that often it's faster to read than it is to listen. And you might be, for whatever reason, in a mode where you prefer to read. Sometimes that happens to me with certain podcasts that come to my attention. You really need to catch up with the latest horrible thing that Ezra Klein said on his podcast. Well, God forbid I listen to that for 90 minutes, the steady drip, drip, drip of false equivalencies, poor reasoning and category errors. No, I'm going to read that because, as our first segment today demonstrates, life is too short. The problem with my transcription program, and I am grateful that it exists, but you do get what you pay for, and well, I'm not paying anything. It doesn't understand me very well. It may not understand anyone else very well either. So here's a sample of what I supposedly said in an episode back about 2 years ago. I quote, apparently me, "Come on, Lantern, Lantern, this effect is open again. Kami, Kamea, Kakin we go. Let us the world come over. Kakin is open. Lot shall open our hands. Kakin is open. Vital. Here's our move. Freedom is tomorrow to be coupled with Andrea. Whereas we go all the way to sky's bread. We're not in your love to think the game you know, as long as the sky make it right when we're so clear, as we go all the way. Woohoo!" The woohoo is literally there on the transcript. I don't know who Kakin is. A prophet? Some sort of ancient god? I'm not sure who this Andrea is that we're all going to couple with either. Thanks in advance, though, Andrea. Note, please, that I am a married man, and I will need to discuss this with my wife before we progress any further. I am kind of excited by the alliteration of Kami, Kamea, Kakin. It's almost poetry. Is it good poetry? I suppose not. Either way, I didn't say anything like that, but it's cool that we almost have the technology to do this. Again, maybe if I mustered up a few cents, I could move up the evolutionary ladder of AI here. This is why AI will never write this program. That's the part that has me in it. That's the weird thing. Someone said on Blue Sky the other day, maybe this is a cliche at this point, I don't know, that they're not looking for technology to do their writing for them so they have more time to do the laundry, but rather that they're looking for technology to do the laundry so they have more time to write. There's not a lot of creativity that goes into doing laundry, but there's a ton of creativity that goes into telling stories, and that's why I'm in it. And I figure almost everyone else who does something creative is in their end of it. There's magic to that. It feels so great when it works. And it is such drudgery when it's not working for you, but that's also part of the fun in a way, because you know there is another side to it. You know you're going to get through that tunnel and the epiphany will strike you. You get to disappear for a bit in the middle is the best part, because it starts flowing through you when you get out of your own way. That's the whole reason I'm here. I like telling stories. I like talking to you. I don't want a machine to do it, but it is kind of fun to see the machine doing it wrong. It reassures me that I'm not wholly replaceable in this little scheme. Cake and willing, I mean. As I alluded to earlier, as I was researching the upcoming second segment of this week's show, which takes us back precisely 100 years to 1925, I found a speech. I wasn't looking for it, I just stumbled across it, by then-President Calvin Coolidge, very conservative Republican, almost inertly conservative Republican, as he laid the cornerstone for a new Jewish community center in Washington. It's a long speech for such a jejune occasion, but sort of shocking in its common sense about relationships in this country. I don't mean boy-girl relationships, but I mean the various groups to which we might subscribe, religious or racial or cultural or political, and not becoming too alienated from each other. And I'm not going to read you the whole thing because we'd be here an extra hour. But this thought from a guy who was pro-capital and very hostile to labor in particular, that's how he got to be a national level politician. Could have come from Eugene Debs, maybe? I'm not sure. Tell me what you think. He said, if our experiment in free institutions has proved anything, it is that the greatest privilege that can be conferred upon people in the mass is to free them from the demoralizing influence of privilege enjoyed by few. This is proved by the experience here, not alone of the Jews, but of all the other racial and national elements that have entered into the making of this nation. We have found that when men and women are left free to find the places for which they are best fitted, some few of them will indeed attain less exalted stations than under a regime of privilege, but the vast majority rise to a higher level, to wider horizons, to worthier attainments. Then again, maybe that's an argument for laissez-faire economics and letting people rise or fall without any help from the government, which a little bit later is how he handled the epic flooding in the South in 1927. I'm just going to leave that there. This week at Baseball Prospectus, I wrote about the Yankees' playoff exit and the time I was hanging out in the hallway at the old stadium when a team employee started sexually fantasizing out loud about one of their then star players. No, I'm not going to say who they were talking about, but they spoke of them quite graphically. And somehow I think it all ties together, that old story and the one we witnessed just this week. At least I think it does. It's all about keeping your eye on the ball and setting expectations. And now we pause prior to our second story of the episode. We're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the 1925 World Series, and the Yankees weren't in that one either. I had planned on discussing this even before Orion Kerkering's error, mental and physical error, ushered the Phillies out of the 2025 season. But now what happened in that long-ago World Series is almost topical, and we'll return to 1925 right after this brief intermission. Check your time travel manual for appropriate garments for the period, and I'll see you on the other side, all right? One resource I consulted when looking back at 1925 noted that fashions for women had turned to the little girl look. That's a quote, and I thought, oh no, and I did not investigate any further. I think it meant shapeless knee-length frocks, and I'm hoping that that's all that it meant. So, the 1925 World Series. I was already thinking about talking about this postseason, as I said, not just because it's the 100th anniversary of that World Series, but because it's so weird from our perspective, featuring what is now an unthinkable matchup of a team that no longer tries and another that is dead as the dinosaurs, the Pirates and Senators. And then you add in the Kerkering factor, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, because errors figured heavily in the outcome of that series and why it is remembered as much as it is, or to the extent that it is. But was it all, as the man who made the errors averred, just a conspiracy to get Hans Wagner off the hook for errors of his own? Surely that is a story for our times. It was Mark Twain who said, at least I think he said, because so many Twain quotes are misattributed or invented, that history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And well, here we are again. I'm not going to run down every player on each team, especially because I've talked some about these clubs many times before. I'll just note a highlight or two that happens to be tickling me right now. So here's a fun bit of trivia about the 1925 Pirates. Their shortstop was Glenn Wright. Wright was a very good defensive shortstop who was noted for his throwing arm. But the reason that you don't know about him, that he's not in the Hall of Fame, I don't mean to assume that you don't know about him. I assume you know everything. But the reason that he's not considered an all-time great player who comes up in these kinds of discussions is he hurt that arm and he came to a quick end as it affected him at the plate as well. He actually wasn't a great hitter overall because he never walked, and he had to hit 300 to be productive. Thing was, it was the 1920s and batting average was cheap, so he could hit 300. In just under 700 games as a Pirate, he hit 298 with a 332 on base percentage and a 441 slugging percentage. It sounds a little better than it was because league averages were so high, but at that time not too many shortstops were hitting, so the numbers really jump out at you. In 3 of Wright's first 4 seasons in the majors, he drove in over 100 runs, and then later, after he was traded to the Dodgers, he reached that mark one last time. So, here's my trivia question for you. How many Pirate shortstops, since Glenn Wright, have driven in 100 runs in a season? I'll give you a second to think about it. I hate when I'm watching a game and they pose a trivia question, and maybe they're posing it for the second time, but I missed it when they posed it for the first time, so they just give you the answer instantaneously before I've had a chance to think about it. How's the weather by you? Is it good? Is your city under occupation yet? No? Good. If Texas can invade Illinois, why can't Illinois invade Texas? We're out of time. The answer is none. Archie Vaughn topped out at 99 in 1935. He got into the 90s in 4 different seasons. He also wound up with the Dodgers. Archie aside, no Pirate shortstop has driven in as many as 80 runs in the last 90 years. Now, a Pirate shortstop has won the MVP since then. That was Dick Groat in 1960. He led the NL in batting average at .325. He batted second all year and hit all of 2 home runs, so he wasn't going to drive in 100 regardless. Now, here's another one. Wright drove in 126 runs for the 1930 Dodgers. As I said, that was his last big year before the injuries ate him up. How many Dodgers shortstops have driven in 100 runs in the 95 years since? Once again, I will give you time to ruminate, cogitate, and utilize your powers of ratiocination, or at least recall. I see here that Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, which is a serial killer story drawn in the style of Richard Scarry, just picked up a Harvey Award. Well, are you ready for the answer? It took 82 years, but one has. Trey Turner did it back in 2022. He got to 100 even. Turner is about 2 strong seasons from getting serious Hall of Fame consideration, I would think. Can he do it at ages 33 and 34? Stay tuned. You know what could stop him more than age, illness, or injury? Rob Manfred. He seems to be angling to lock the players out after next season, so that's something we all have not to look forward to in this wonderful world so full of things to be excited about. I haven't made a full list or anything, but there must be some players who missed some important round numbers due to 1981, 1994, and 95, even one of the earlier stoppages like 1972. Not to mention the one that no one could help, the loss of 100 games approximately due to COVID in 2020. So back to 1925, Wright was not by far the best player on the 1925 Pirates. That was outfielder Kai Kyler, who played mostly right field that year, but also got in a month in center when Max Carey, another future Hall of Famer, got hurt. He hit .357, .423, .598 with 43 doubles, a league-leading 26 triples, 18 home runs, 102 runs driven in, and a crazy 144 runs scored, a number so high that Shohei Ohtani only passed it by 2 runs this year. We don't have a metric for most fun players of all time. It would not be Rob Manfred. Such a thing can't exist because fun is really defined by one's expectations. But I would still like to argue that Kyler could be on that list. If you take the offensive inflation and segregation of his time away from his numbers, he probably wasn't too different from Johnny Damon or Duran Duran. And yeah, before I get emails, I know I said Duran Duran as opposed to Jaron Duran. It's more fun that way. For me, anyway. What if Duran Duran is a lonely outfielder waiting by the park? Don't answer that question. My point is that these are versatile, fast players who could do anything or can do anything that a hitter might do on a ball field, from hit it out to run one out, and Duran has hit some inside the park home runs. That's the kind of player Kai Kyler was. There are also so many fun aspects to the Senators in this period, but this time I'll restrict myself to just a few details. Their best position player was New Jersey's own left fielder Leon Goose Goslin, who hit .334, .394, .547 with a cool 201 hits, including 34 doubles, a league-leading 20 triples, and 18 home runs. His hitting more triples than home runs was almost entirely a park effect at work. It's not that he wasn't fast, he was. But as you know, it was very difficult to hit a ball out at Griffith Stadium. Forbes Field was hard too. As such, Goose hit .323 with 12 triples and only 6 home runs in Washington. As Leadbelly sang, it's a bourgeois town. That must be the explanation. On the road, he hit .346 with 8 triples and 12 home runs. He played about 1,400 career games as a Washington Senator, or Nat, depending on your mood, or their mood, and he hit 31 home runs at Griffith Stadium, 96 on the road, so he was just punished by that ballpark. And I should mention that all of this was before he wrecked his arm trying to throw a shot put from the warning track to home plate. Don't do that if you are an aspiring or professional athlete. There's a Surgeon General's warning out against that. The Senators' two best pitchers were the spitballers Stan Coveleski and Walter Johnson. Both won exactly 20 games, with Coveleski also leading the American League in ERA. Johnson's ERA was only .307, weak by his exalted standards. But here's the fun part. He had a Shohei Ohtani season. Not only did he win 20 games, Shohei's never done that, and he probably will never do that. But on the mound, Walter hit .433 in 107 trips to the plate, including a couple of home runs. So take that, Tariq Skubal. May I talk about the world of 1925 for a second? Republicans had, as I already mentioned, the presidency, both houses of Congress, and 7 of 9 seats on the Supreme Court. Scott Fitzgerald published The Great Gatsby. Edward Hopper painted House by the Railroad. Charlie Chaplin came out with The Gold Rush, and his final wife, Una O'Neill Chaplin, was born. Don't think too hard about that. Charlie had his preferences. The Scopes trial took place. Paul Newman and Jack Lemmon were born. They were never in the same movie. It's sort of hard to imagine them sharing the same cinematic universe. They were both very good at what they did, but they were different flavors, like peanut butter and mustard. Flannery O'Connor and Edward Gorey came into the world then, too. Mel Torme, Sammy Davis Jr., Gore Vidal, Elmore Leonard, Lenny Bruce, American martyr Medgar Evers, and that beautiful, beautiful man, Yogi Berra, and Dick Van Dyke. Keep punching, Mr. Van Dyke. We also lost foundational ballplayer and attorney John Montgomery Ward, Charles Ebbets, the amazing artist John Singer Sargent, and the poetess Amy Lowell, who wrote one that went like this. Through the spring-thickened branches, I see it floating, an ivory dome, headed to gold by the dim sun. It hangs against a white-misted sky, and the swollen branches open or cover it as they blow in the wet wind. That was Fenway Park, subtitled Study in Orange and Silver. And I should mention we also lost Big Six, Christy Mathewson, to tuberculosis during the World Series. This was the year of the Florida land bubble, with lots later revealed to be in the ocean being sold for huge prices. Coming soon, condos to 20,000 leagues under the sea, you sucker. It was the year that John McGraw sold his reputation, as part of that, pumping another bit of vanishing real estate called Pennant Park. We've talked about that in a prior episode. While looking at that, I happened to notice that Florida passed and its governor signed a law requiring daily reading of the Bible in the public schools. Now, no comment was permitted on the passages read. Monthly reports to the state on the passages read, however, were required. I feel like comprehension being neglected, the value of the exercise was negated. Often comprehension requires guidance. I realize people assign greater meaning or value to the Bible than, say, this month's issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, but in both cases, if you don't understand what you just read, or if you're only a kid and not practiced in the art of decoding and interpretation, guided to understand it, there's no point. See, if they happen to be reading, let's just say The Great Gatsby since it came out that year, they weren't, it flopped, but still, stay with me on this, then we are willing to acknowledge that there are many different possible ways to read and interpret a passage in a book. There's the author's intention and what you get out of it, which aren't always the same thing, and it really comes down to what you can argue for and convince someone else to believe. But when it comes to scripture, which is a book, we get nervous about that. So make them read it, but don't let them try to understand it. That would be risky, dangerous. So if we're going to talk about the 1925 World Series, which did go the full 7, we have to talk about Washington Senator shortstop Roger Peckinpaugh. I've brushed past this story so many times on the show I've lost track of it, but I don't think I've told it in full until now. So let's start with the basic facts of his career. He was born in Ohio in 1891 and signed with the Naps out of high school when he was 19. They farmed him out for 1910 and 1911, then gave him a half-season major league trial in 1912. He was in competition with a couple of other kid shortstops, Ivy Olson and the ill-fated Ray Chapman, with Chapman, who was inarguably the best of the lot, ultimately winning out. Olson hung around as a utility guy for a couple of years and was eventually sold to the Reds. He then went on to have a long run as the starting shortstop for the Dodgers, though in retrospect it's hard to see why. And we also profiled him in a prior episode. Never got on base, ever. Peckinpaugh was traded to the Yankees in 1913 since he had been squeezed out for a couple of fringe players, one outfielder, one infielder, neither of whom did much for Cleveland, although I admit I'm cheating a bit here in not breaking that down a little more because it might spin us off on another long digression. The outfielder was one Jack Lelyveld of the Netherlands, land of Gouda and Edam. Lelyveld was a career .301, .353, .381 hitter in a short major league career, roughly 400 games. But those averages are very good in the context of 1909 through 1914. But his clubs, the Senators, Yankees, and Naps, just wouldn't let him play. He spent 18 years in the minors, hit something like .330, and if you add up all his hits from both the majors and minors, he totaled over 3,000. The sense I get is not that he was blocked at every position that he played throughout his major league career, but that he was very, very slow with bad feet, and they just wouldn't play him. Maybe if he had been a catcher like Ernie Lombardi, managers might have tolerated his being a 45-foot sprinter in a 90-foot game, but he was an outfielder, and triples were a real hazard back then. The Yankees were in need of a shortstop in 1913, and Peckinpaugh took over right away. He was a very good glove. His fielding, wrote Baseball Magazine, has always been an optical delight. And although he wasn't an impact hitter, he wasn't terrible when considered in the context of his position. During the center of his career, 1913 to 1925, and again, remember the bulk of that came during the dead ball era, he hit .261, .338, .340, which was right around the median for regulars at his position. What I'm trying to say, and this is probably cruel in kicking a fellow when he's down, is you would have rather had him than Anthony Volpe. What's a bit weird about the fact that he was at the median in terms of production is the timing. Many of the superior hitters at shortstop were about to age out, as Hans Wagner and Art Fletcher did then, or leave the field due to death or disability. That would be Chapman and Charlie Holliker, who, as you know, had some combination of physical and emotional breakdown. Thus, while several shortstops were better on a peak basis during that 12-year window, when you look at the totality of it, you're really down to Dave Bancroft and then Peckinpaugh. He was considered a serious, sober young man, and in a turn that was strange even for the Yankees of that time, or now, in 1914, manager Frank Chance, no longer a peerless leader, not a leader at all in this moment, violently fell out with owner Frank Farrell over Hal Chase's corruption and was let go. Peckinpaugh, all of 23, was made manager for the final 20 games of the season. He'd later have a long and respectable run without winning anything as Cleveland's manager, but this move wasn't made in recognition of his potential so much as the Yankees just weren't very serious. Somehow, he survived that period and lasted into the far more sane ownership of Jacob Ruppert and Till Houston. Well, marginally more sane. The Yankees didn't start becoming truly rational until Ruppert bought Houston out in 1923 and became the sole owner. Peckinpaugh got to play alongside Babe Ruth for a couple of years and played on the first pennant winner in team history in 1921, although that was what ended his run in pinstripes. In Game 8, the decisive Game 8, in the first inning, holy foreshadowing, Batman, he let a ball go through his legs. Said ball scoring what would prove to be the only run of the game for the Giants. He also hit 179, and so the Yankees, in tantrum mode, did what they always did back then. They exiled him to the Red Sox with 3 players and $100,000 in easing Harry Frazie's divorce money in return for half a starting rotation, Sad Sam Jones and Bullet Joe Bush, and a more reliable shortstop, Everett Scott. Scott was an awful hitter. but he was durable. He had the consecutive game streak that Lou Gehrig broke, and he hadn't yet fumbled any balls in the World Series, so win-win. To just stay on Everett Scott for 1 second, he hit .254 with a .282 on-base percentage for the Yankees, .324 slugging percentage in about 500 games. If I had been watching then, I would have been checking my calendar in eager anticipation of the day when Alvaro Espinosa was due to be born. And I was not exactly what you would call an Espinosa fan. Nothing against him as a person at all. He seemed like he was trying very hard, but I just, as a matter of religion and morality and science, do not like those players who put up sub 300 on base percentages. Peckinpaugh never played for the Red Sox. They held him for about 3 weeks before sending him on to the Senators in return for Jumping Joe Dugan, the third baseman that Washington was holding for the Yankees. We've covered this saga in a previous episode as well, the short version being that Connie Mack was sick of Dugan's antics. The Yankees needed a third baseman with Frank Baker aging out, but it would have looked bad if the Yankees had hoarded yet another good player. So Dugan was sent on a little trip around the American League before he finally went to New York at midseason in 1922. That didn't look so good then either, but that's how the Senators got Roger Peckinpaugh. He began to wear the big W on his chest when they bothered to wear anything at all. The Senators had some seriously plain uniforms back then. When I say they didn't wear anything at all, I don't mean they played naked. They just played without branding a lot of the time. A needless expense, I can imagine Clark Griffith grousing. He was so cheap that if you bought yogurt with the fruit on the bottom, he would pick it out and return it to the store. I'm not saying that really happened, but it's what he would have done if he could have gotten away with it. Peaches, a luxury. You'll have the plain goo and like it. That said, the Senators were building into being a very good team, and Roger Peckinpaugh, arriving for the 1922 season and providing defense, leadership, and a little bit of hitting, was part of their rise. And how that led to his downfall is something that we'll discuss right after this break. I just want to mention, I rechecked this during the break. The uniform database at the Hall of Fame site is so much fun and such a nice resource that from 1912 through 1940, with the exception of 2 years, the Senators wore nothing on the breast of their uniform, on the blouses. Sometimes they had pinstripes. Sometimes they just wore plain white uniforms. There were years, including the pennant-winning 1933 season, when the caps were just blank. They just wore blue caps. In most of those seasons, maybe all of them, they had a W on the left sleeve of the jersey, but no logo, no city name. The two exceptions were 1917, when Griffith was very involved in the war effort, and so the Senators wore a kind of patriotic shield on the breast of the uniform. And in 1938, he finally sprung for some embroidery. He must have had a good year, and they got a stylized W on the blouse. But again, they had to give it back after that one season. The Senators were very good in this period. Their 60-year existence was largely miserable, but the 20s, 30s, and select moments in the early 40s were pretty good. They won the World Series against the Giants in John McGraw's final postseason in 1924, and Peck hit .417. Redemption? Not so fast. You have all no doubt heard of how the Most Valuable Player award announcement was moved until after the postseason. I don't think the MVP award was blamed fairly in this instance. It was an example of the fallacy post hoc ergo propter hoc, after therefore because the award doesn't make it rain. But the legend is that Peckinpaugh played so tight in the 1925 World Series, having won the award beforehand, that it was considered a mercy to move it and spare future winners from experiencing the same sort of embarrassment. It didn't really happen that way. It is true that in the fall of 1925, as the Senators successfully defended their pennant, Peckinpaugh was voted the AL MVP. The baseball writers felt he was more valuable than players like Tigers outfielder Harry Heilmann, who hit .393, or Al Simmons, who followed him with a .387 batting average, and a crazy 253 hits. Since there was no Cy Young Award, we should also mention Walter Johnson, whose accomplishments that season we've already discussed. On a WAR basis, it was Heilman, then Johnson, Simmons, Tris Speaker, Goslin, Herb Pennock, Urban Shocker, Slim Harris, that's an unexpected name, Ty Cobb, and Eddie Rommel. Peckinpaugh, with, and again this is in retrospect, 2.7 wins above replacement, was down in the low 20s. In the voting, he edged Bucketfoot Al by just a couple of points, and then went off to meet the Pirates. What's a bit odd about the timing of the award was that Peck was 34 years old and in his last season as a regular. Normally, you don't think of players getting an award that primarily recognizes their defense when they're about to leave the league. There are exceptions, but primarily glove work is for the young. Maybe his winning it was like Henry Fonda getting Best Actor for On Golden Pond when he was 76 and everyone knew he was ailing, so it was a career service award. Young Mr. Lincoln? No. Grapes of Wrath? No. The Oxbow Incident? Mr. Roberts? Come on, please. The Wrong Man? 12 Angry Men? No. We gotta fix this. In any case, players didn't get to double dip on MVP awards back then, and Walter Johnson had won it in 1924, so the writers had to find another senator. When Peckinpaugh was voted MVP, the Washington Evening Star wrote, "Day after day, this veteran of the diamond has been playing his best, and a good best it has been. Steady as a rock, never flustered, making his errors along with others, but without discouragement or demoralization. A dangerous man to opposing pitchers in emergencies, always shrewd in his swift analysis of a critical situation, gifted with an uncanny, instinctive knowledge of the plans of the opposition, and moreover, capable of extraordinary speed in defensive play. Peckinpaugh has made the Washington infield one of the fastest and most effective in baseball history. He has inspired his associates with confidence and thus has contributed greatly and directly to the morale of the team, which is the winning element." The Washington Post editorialized, "The award to Peckinpaugh comes to the veteran shortstop after 16 years' service in baseball and after having been discarded, not perhaps as a has-been, but as having outlived his usefulness as a member of the New York Yankees. There is a lesson to the youth of America in this honor given to Peckinpaugh. It is never too late to win. Keeping everlastingly at it, never giving up, plodding on and on, beating down barriers and overcoming obstacles often turns defeat into victory." Simultaneously, Post columnist Baxter wrote, "He plays the game as he lives, with his mind and his heart alert. The cold fingers of baseball do not show Peckinpaugh in the true light that he deserves. No system has ever been devised for putting in their proper place the sensational plays turned in at the moment when they staved off defeat, nor the hits registered at the one moment in the game when they were most needed. These have been the things in which Peckinpaugh has specialized." Well, you know what happened next. What's next is the whole legend. The Senators played the Pirates in the World Series. The weather was miserable throughout the week, and perhaps, maybe, had something to do with what happened. Peck claimed that it did. As I said, the Pirates were a club with good speed. They led the National League in triples and stolen bases, with Kai and Max Carey stealing over 40 bases each. Maybe that put pressure on the Senators' defense. That explanation was offered at the time. Whatever the reason, Peck went to pieces in the field. He made 8 errors, but there were other misplays that weren't scored as errors, like double plays not turned. In Game 1, he made a high throw on an easy roller. Now that didn't change the outcome, but in Game 2, he made 2 errors, one of which led to the winning run crossing the plate. In Game 3, it was reported that, and it shouldn't amaze anybody at this point that the papers can turn on you quickly, Peckinpaugh lent aid and comfort to the enemy, as he had Thursday in Pittsburgh, by committing a wild throw of Wright's roller. The Senators still won. He was clean behind Walter Johnson, who pitched a shutout in Game 4. The Senators by then were up 3-1. It was all but over. In Game 5, though, he threw away a Stuffy McInnis grounder. Didn't affect the final score, but the Pirates won. Pirates won Game 6 as well, taking a 3-2 decision. Peck made another bad throw, but that runner did not score. Parenthetically, both teams had part-time first basemen having great years. For the Pirates, that was Stuffy McInnis, who hit .368, .437, .484 in 59 games, whereas the Senators had Moon Harris, who, once again, we've profiled in previous episodes. He hit .323, .430, .573 in 100 games. And in the World Series, he played in all 7 games and went 11 for 25 with 3 home runs. That's .440 and an .880 slugging percentage. It just happened to be in the losing cause. After Peckinpaugh made his 6th error in Game 6, Hans Wagner, in attendance, was reported to be very happy. "Boy, I've been pulling for that," he said. Someone asked him if he had something against Peckinpaugh. "No," Wagner replied. "I've just been praying all these years for someone to come along and equal or break my record. Fall after fall, I have seen the World Series come and go, and no one getting near enough to give me a run until this year comes. And old Peck bobbles and bobbles and bobbles just when nobody expects him to, and at last he has caught me. My name has been in the book so long, I've wanted someone to come along and erase it, and maybe Peck will do it yet." Wagner was talking about his performance in the very first World Series, 1903, when he made 6 errors in 8 games, and the ball was irregular, and the fields were irregular, and they weren't gloves, they were old lamb chops or something. Game 7 cemented Peck's place in history. The Senators led 6-4 in the bottom of the 7th inning at Pittsburgh. First, Peck misplayed what was called an easy pop-up to deep short. Max Carey doubled home that runner, and he in turn was tripled home by third baseman Pie Traynor. That tied the game at 6. Peckinpaugh batted with 1 out and no one on in the top of the 8th, the score still tied, and seemingly redeemed himself again, hitting a solo home run off pitcher Ray Creamer to give his team a 7-6 lead. But the bottom of the 8th was coming, and what went wrong wasn't just on Peck. The Senators' player-manager was Bucky Harris, the second baseman, not the most astute in-game manager. He had started Walter Johnson on short rest, even though Johnson, number 1, said that at his age, 37, he could not go on short rest, and B, he had a bad leg at the time. It had obviously proved to be a bad call. Walter proved to be a wonderful marksman, Ring Lardner wrote, and hit bat after bat. It was a terrible strain to have a runner on first base. Walter avoided this by having most of them on second. Yet, here Harris was pushing Johnson into the 8th. His not hooking Johnson at any point in the game was second-guessed as much as Peckinpaugh's general existence. And yet, Harris and the big train might have gotten through it all, if not for Peckinpaugh. And I just can't resist saying this is the same Bucky Harris who is manager of the 1947 Yankees in the famous almost no-hit game pitched by Bill Bevins, intentionally walked Pete Reiser when the Dodgers put him up to bat, even though everyone in the ballpark but Harris knew that Reiser was severely concussed and wasn't quite sure where he was at the time. But here we go to the Pirates at bat in the bottom of the 8th, the Senators leading 7-6 thanks to Peck's homer. Johnson had induced 2 outs on a pop-up to first base and a flyout to center field. That brought up Pirates catcher Earl Smith, or Oil Smith if you prefer. He doubled. Pirates manager Bill McKechnie, one of the greats, sent up Carson Bigby to pinch hit for the pitcher, who was still Kramer, and pinch ran for his catcher with Emil Edey. Bigby doubled, scoring Edey, tie game. Johnson should have been out of there. Today he would have been, but Harris made no move. Next, Walter Johnson walked Eddie Moore to put runners on first and second and bring up the fastest man in the NL, or one of them, if not Kyler, Max Carey. Carey hit a bouncing ball to short. Peckinpaugh could have thrown to first to end the inning, and here you have your resonance with Orion Kerkering, because Peckinpaugh didn't go to first base. Instead, he attempted to get the force on Eddie Moore at second, and that was a poor decision because Harris, the second baseman, as well as the manager, hadn't yet made it to the bag. In any case, even if he had been there, Peckinpaugh threw high, with Harris having to jump for it. That was error number 8, and it loaded the bases. Carey was credited with reaching via a fielder's choice, but he thought he would have beaten the play even if Peck had thrown to first. Not wholly implausible. It was entirely possible, in fact, but we'll never know. Kyler followed with a ground rule double, scoring 2 runs. If the umpire's judgment had been a little different, it would have been an inside-the-park home run, but it hit the tarp in foul ground in right field, so Kyler had to go back to second base after scoring. Johnson finally got out of the inning at that point, but it was too late. 9-7 Pirates. The Senators, Sam Rice, Bucky Harris, and Goose Goslin went down in order against journeyman reliever Red Oldham in the top of the 9th, and the Pirates were champions, which no one ever gets to say anymore, and haven't gotten to say it since 1979. Remember all the nice things that the Washington papers had said about Peckinpaugh when he won the MVP award? After the World Series, headlines from the Washington Star said, "Pirates got invaluable assistance from Raja," and "Peck's failure in series may give Meyer chance," meaning a replacement for him. Shortstop prospect Buddy Meyer, who would turn out to be a very good player indeed. And here's a favorite. Peck defeats Johnson, meaning Walter Johnson, in Great Sea Disaster. Roger Peckinpaugh, named by the Committee of Baseball Writers as the most valuable player to his club in the American League of 1925, comes out of the series as Grand High Master of the Order of Sublime and Ancient Goats. Never again will Peck be asked to be named the best ball player in any league, or even the best cultivator of early potatoes. This was typical. Before 1924, he was considered to be on the downside. Now, after 1925, he was on the downside again. What have you done for me lately, buddy, Mr. MVP? The Senators put him on waivers. The Yankees actually claimed him. Miller Huggins said he could use some veteran help in the infield. It was true. The Senators pulled him back. He played only part-time in 1926, the Senators going with the 22-year-old Buddy Meyer, who would eventually spend most of his career at second base. Peck later told the historian Eugene Murdoch, "That 1925 series was not as bad as it seems. I had a lot of errors, but the field was bad and wet. I think about 4 of the errors were on low throws with that soggy, muddy ball. Joe Judge, who would normally eat up those throws, wasn't able to come up with them. Anyway, I wound up with getting credit for 8 errors. I seriously doubted 2 of them. As I tell people, what the Pittsburgh scorers were trying to do in that series was let me break Hannes Wagner's World Series record for errors." The only problem with that excuse is that Peckinpaugh made errors in 2 of the 3 games at Washington as well, when Pittsburgh official scorers wouldn't have been in charge. He died in 1977, probably still shaking his fist at the angry sky that made him a goat, or maybe the angry press box that made him a goat. Whatever gets you through the night, as John Lennon sang. You know, Peck really was a great shortstop. He's still in the top 20 in games played at the position. He had to be worthwhile for managers to run him out there that often for that long. He also made 553 errors. It was just part of the deal back then. Small gloves, slippery ball, 40 or 50 errors by the shortstop. Sometimes we just have to accept our limitations too, right? Sometimes the ball just slips. Sometimes it slips 8 times. Sometimes you throw to the wrong base, make the wrong investment, marry the wrong person, say the wrong thing, and destroy an important relationship. My God, how do any of us get through a single hour without screwing up? From that perspective, it's a miracle Peck didn't make 16 errors, or that anything is fielded cleanly ever. I somehow completed this episode concurrently with the final Mariners-Tigers game, and my goodness, what a great contest. I feel bad for Tommy Kahnle, though. Should you wish to follow me on social media and express your regrets to Tommy Kahnle, you can do so at stephengoldman@bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com, and there's a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, bang, you're there. I've got nothing else to say about that. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please go to patreon.com/The Infinite Inning, gear of a rudimentary kind, available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, spare a thought for Kirkering and Canely. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring, who says, Kami, Kamea, cake in his eye. Let us go to sky's bread. Freedom is tomorrow. Well, that explains a lot if he's caking. And if freedom is indeed tomorrow at Sky's Bread, then I will be back next week with more tales from inside the infinite inning.